Welcome to Persons of Interest. I am your host, Derek Dockett. Julie Smith is my guest in this episode, and for those that don't know her, she's an instructor at Webster University, an author, and a speaker. Her main focus is media literacy, something that she's been passionate about for a number of years. This includes traditional media and new media like Twitter and other forms of social media. The first time I heard her speak was back in March of 2018, and I've followed her on Twitter ever since then. Julie and I discussed a number of things, including her background, what she teaches and how she teaches, and that includes her media literacy. We talked about navigating and making sense of different forms of media, including Twitter, Facebook, news, and everything. We even talked about educating young minds and how we can better serve young adults and how they can make sense of what's legit and not legit in the media. So this is Julie Smith on Persons of Interest. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really excited about this episode of Persons of Interest because, as you guys know, I'm a huge Twitter nerd. I will gladly call myself that. And I had the opportunity to hear from this fine young woman. She came out to the Wentzville School District and talked to a huge group of staff and teachers about what she does and some of her speaking engagements. God, I think that was like 2018 when I first started. Julie Smith. I'll preface it by saying I know you're a teacher at Webster. I know you've written books, but your engagement on social media I love because in short snippets you provide so much more education than people don't realize that they need. Like I love the fact that you show people in 2 minutes how to upload a picture and reverse Google image search and find out, is it legit? So that's my preference, but I'm going to let you go through and introduce yourself for people that may not know you.
Well, I think you did a wonderful job.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You referred to me as a young lady, so
I try to be respectful
I'm
too.
excited. Thank you. So I really got interested in the whole media literacy thing when I was in high school, but I didn't realize that that's what it was called.
Okay.
Right. We had to do this assignment on Marshall McLuhan. And I remember he was the Canadian media theorist who said the median is the message. And so he was the first one to really analyze all of this. And he came up with the term global village, which now, of course, we're completely living in. Right. And I remember doing this assignment on him, and I had this thought, like, this doesn't feel like work. This was fascinating to me. And now looking back, I can see how that was kind of the beginning, right? That's what you want to do. You want to follow whatever doesn't feel like work to you. So, I mean, I don't want the university to know this, but I would totally do my job for free.
Don't worry, nobody's listening.
Because I love it so much.
Yeah.
And it's a real privilege to kind of fall into a position where you would do it even if you weren't getting paid. And so it was kind of a zigzag trail, though. My undergraduate degree is in public relations and marketing. Then I ended up working as a consumer credit reporter for a company called Dun & Bradstreet. And they offered graduate school. And I thought, well, if I might as well get a master's if they're going to pay for it, right? And then I thought, well, if I'm going to work all day and be in class all night, it has to be a topic that I'm interested in. Well, I've always kind of liked mass media, so I'll get my master's in that. And that's kind of how it happened. And then I ended up with a teaching job at Notre Dame High School, which is an all-girls Catholic high school here in St. Louis. It's because I've never had an education class. I'm not a certified teacher. So because they were a private school, they could hire me, and I sold them on this idea of media literacy. So I started teaching media literacy at Notre Dame High School in 1996. And then that kind of morphed into an adjunct job at Webster University, which also became an adjunct job at SIU Edwardsville. And I did both of those schools for a while, adjuncting. And I guess I've been full-time at Webster now. This is either going to be my third or fourth year coming up.
Awesome.
And I love it. And so then when I came out to Wentzville, that was just a little side hustle that I have where people will ask me to come and do talks and trainings about media literacy. So I'm thrilled when I get to evangelize for the critical consumption of media messages, because that's what it's all about.
Which is really important too, because to me, I feel there is that untapped world of the younger minds or folks that they want to use social media as a tool, and they start using it, and then they start using it more and more and more, and then they're like, oh, I love it. I can do this with it. I can not only connect with my students, I can connect with other professionals. I can then connect with this. They have a Twitter account. Oh, the place that I go to eat has a Twitter account. And then you just get more and more and more intertwined with it, not thinking about what's happening beneath the layers. And I think, I don't want to steal your thunder, but we were on the same wavelength as we were chatting before and in DMs earlier this week about how all this sort of works, especially now in this climate, as people sort of have to decipher what's what and what's legit and everything.
Well, and many people choose not to decipher what's legit.
Yeah.
And so we're in this strange time, right, where the average American is consuming between 11 and 11 and a half hours a day of electronic mass media. And we never stop to ask ourselves, what are they telling us?
Right.
Who is doing the telling? Who's making money from this? What information is being left out? How could other people interpret what I'm consuming in a different way? What point of view is being presented? What lifestyle is being presented? We just don't ask enough questions about it. So a media literacy proponent does not say that the media are bad. We merely say, you know what, if we're spending this much time with something, we need to be talking about it more.
Yeah. And
we need to be talking about it from birth on up. And in fact, this morning, someone on Twitter said media literacy should be taught as a college freshman course. And I was like, oh no. birth, K-12, and someone even asked, well, how early is it to start? I'm like, birth, straight out of the chute.
Yeah,
Let's just start with that critical consumption.
Middle schoolers get on social media now. I mean, they're getting on TikTok, they're getting on Snapchat. I mean, they're getting on apps that I don't like myself. And it's like,
well, and toddlers are sitting there with iPads.
Yeah.
So, obviously we're not going to teach a toddler to ask critical questions about the media, but we need to talk about what is the long-term effect of all of this screen time. And I'm not one of those people that say screen time is bad, because not all screen time is created equal.
Right. Very important. Very important.
But we just need to talk about it more, and it absolutely should be included in schools.
Yeah. So
because it's so cross-curricular. That's the thing. I was lucky at Notre Dame High School. They, it was a non-traditional school, and so they just created a media literacy course.
Okay.
Most K-12 schools don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
But what's nice about media literacy is you can include it in science and social studies and English and health. Every possible school subject can include some media literacy skills. And the kids love it. It's engaging because that's the world they live in.
Yes, it's a digital world that they're living in.
It is.
I'm curious. So I joined Twitter in 2009. I got on Facebook, connected with my girlfriend, which is now my wife at the time, to stay in contact in 2005 or 6. And that's my, start of my digital footprint. I never took a class. I was out of college once, these social media tools these platforms become popular. When you're teaching it at Notre Dame, you're teaching it now at Webster, what do your classes look like when you're teaching people about media literacy? Not just social media, but everything. Because I want to keep reminded people that are listening, this isn't just a social media thing. This is the news. This is what we see on TV. This is media literacy, not just social media literacy.
No, yeah, exactly. And social media literacy, I guess, would fall under that umbrella.
Okay, yeah.
Along with news literacy, right? So media literacy would talk about radio programming, the music industry, publishing, magazine publishing, television, soundtracks, who owns what films, it's any type of media that you consume. We're asking those questions about it. So I started something a couple of years ago. There's a standard list of media literacy questions, which I kind of went over a little bit before. Who's the sender of the message? What's their motive or intent? Who profits from the message? What information is left out? Who's the intended audience? How could someone else interpret this message differently from me? Those are the biggies. my favorite question is, who profits from this message? Who's follow the money, right? So what I started doing in class then is that every class period begins with me sharing some media message, whether it's a print ad from a magazine, it could be a news clip, it could be a television commercial, it could be a scene from a movie. And then I have the students go through those questions in groups as a kind of a warm-up exercise.
Okay.
To get them ready to talk about the media. And it got to be pretty interesting because the students would always wonder, like, oh, I wonder what she's going to have for us today. Because I always like to try to find something that was really compelling.
Yeah.
We also, in media literacy class, we also spend a lot of time talking about audience and the types of audiences there are, the types of engagement, because what a lot of people don't realize is that we are exposed to media constantly that we didn't necessarily choose. So we're consuming media as a secondary activity, and we don't ever think about that.
Right.
Like it's impossible to go to a restaurant now where there's not televisions or music that you did not choose, right? So there's different ways to analyze audiences. There's different ways to analyze effects. And there's different ways to analyze exposure. We can be affected cognitively, aesthetically, emotionally, and how does that affect the way we interpret those messages? So that when we end up talking about online misinformation, for example, the first thing I tell them is you have to ask yourself, if you are having a really strong emotional response to something, that is the first clue that you have to check it out.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get wrapped up, especially in today's media environment where we're in our social media bubbles, right? Echo chambers. In fact, there was a really interesting article in Wired this week about how Facebook groups are, quote unquote, destroying America.
Yeah.
Because they're fringe on both sides and they're closed and can, in many cases, anonymous.
Right.
And so it feeds people's longing to be in a group and to have their fringe opinions verified. And then sometimes people act on those. So it was just a really interesting article. And I think that the pendulum is starting to move to the direction where people are really starting to think about what all of this means.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then there's so many articles about us living in a post-truth world now where we're more interested in what we believe than what is actually true.
Yeah.
Because you know what? It's so easy now. Like I could probably find a study on Twitter that says today is actually Thursday and not Friday.
And someone and someone would retweet it and it'd have lots of likes.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well, it's been retweeted. It's like, oh no.
And that's something we do too. We talk a lot about bots and troll farms and how they operate. I just want the students to understand the role they play in the economic structure of it all. If they are using an app or a website for free, they are not the customer. They're the product being sold.
Yeah. So,
and that takes a while to get them to care about that.
Yeah. So I look at it, it's kind of weird as someone who takes in, like I'm on Twitter all the time. I will gladly admit this. I called myself a Twitter nerd at the start of this. I'm sort of leaning back off of Facebook, as many people are for different reasons.
I hate it.
And I actually had, for those, and I've mentioned this in several other episodes, the previous job, I worked in college athletics, and my role was to maintain the social media platform. So I was on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, you name it. My job was to manage those platforms. And now that I have a job where I'm not, I have one platform that I use to sort of promote the brand and promote what I'm doing. And honestly, I'm using it to promote students of our district, which is like the number one thing. I'm using it for a totally different reason. Now, I was using it to promote the student athletes of the colleges, but at the same time, my mind has shifted. And from a personal standpoint, though, I'm not on all those platforms just for me. Like I've gotten rid of my personal Instagram. I've gotten rid of, all these other accounts. I really only maintain my Twitter account and I've got Facebook just to I'm an administrator for some other groups, and I'm like, if I can get somebody else to take over being the admin, I'd gladly, deactivate my Facebook page. But my long way of asking this is these platforms have changed so much. It's like technology. Things change over time. Twitter's changed over time. Facebook's changed over time. Do you see what you're telling kids year after year? different things happening, because there always are going to be those base sort of foundation sort of tactics, because they won't change. But as these platforms evolve with their terms of service, which nobody really reads, does that mold what you're teaching?
Nobody reads those. Nobody reads those, and they're written horribly.
Yeah.
On purpose, so
Right.
Well, you're right. Even though the platforms change, when I started, the internet was new. And then I started teaching about MySpace.
Gosh, how can I forget?
And Friendster.
Yes.
Okay.
AOL, it goes back. It goes back
and
years.
My youngest was really into Club Penguin, right? So the technology evolves, but the questions stay the same.
Yeah.
The questions stay the same. And I think it's important to really ask, how does this make you feel? I've had so many students, it's very interesting once they start talking about their media life. They're such deep thinkers. And I've had so many students say, I'm not the person that I am on Instagram. Like, this is a person.
Openly say that.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really big step, right? Is to acknowledge the fact that we have different audiences on each platform.
Yeah.
Who's our target audience in each platform? And how does that affect the messages that we send? And how does each platform make us feel? Because I ended up quitting Facebook December 31st, 2018.
Okay.
And there were a lot of reasons for that. And then during 2019, which I made it through the year just fine.
Go figure.
I didn't have withdrawal or anything.
Amazing that could happen.
I felt really good about myself for a whole year. Then I had several Twitter friends say, Julie, you're sharing all these tools about how to verify online information. Do you have a place where you can put all that? And I have a website, but it doesn't get the traction that if I created a Facebook page would do. So on January 1st of 2020, because it's an election year, I created a specific page just for me to post my tools on Facebook. Well, here I was thinking that I was going to be helping discern election information, and then it turned into COVID-19 misinformation.
Yeah.
Then it turned into Black Lives Matter misinformation. Yeah. So it's good job security for me, because there's always people who are interested in these tools, but it has me at least back on the Facebook platform on a professional level. And I don't check it very often, and I'm still not a fan, but I understand its use, at least for sharing tools.
Do you find people getting use and some benefit out of it? The Facebook page?
Yes, in fact, yes. There's a lot of engagements, and it's interesting how Facebook can tell you exactly how many people have engaged with it, and it's interesting to see. I guess the not big moment, but something that I thought was really interesting is that after about a week, I was starting to get lots of likes from people that I didn't know. So that meant that people were sharing it.
It was being reached,
and finding the information valuable.
Yeah. Interesting.
I've had really a great time too debunking social media stuff on my YouTube channel, because I think it's so important for people to realize how easy it is to do this.
Yes. So let's get into that, because that's what I said at the top. That's one of my favorite things, when you show how easy it is to take a photo that someone's DM'd you or shared or tweeted and tagged you, and to just simply Google image reverser. So I'll let you explain what it is you do before you dive into how, like, the specifics of it, because I don't think many people know that, because I use it from a standpoint of finding out if an image is has rights to it. So as a graphic designer, if someone says, I love to use this image, well, let's find out if you have to pay for it, or who took it, or if you owned it. If not, let's go out and take our own picture and do it. That's the creative standpoint of me.
That is excellent media literacy, Derek.
Thank you. But that also comes from my college professor that says, when you buy stock photography, make sure you know you're buying and know how you're buying it. Because if you use a picture and it's printed in the newspaper, and the owner of that picture says that's not for commercial use, that's for private use, that's where my mindset is when I think of it. So
I think that's really wise.
Yes.
And think about, like, when we create memes, we are using pictures taken by someone else. We are using images that we do not have the copyright to.
Right.
But at the same time, we are creating something new.
Right.
Right. So there's this interesting gray area that all of this has created. So, well, I'll give you a couple interesting examples. Last week, I had a college friend reach out and say, my sister-in-law just shared this, but it seems fishy. And it was about a police officer that had been run over in Springfield, Missouri. And all I did was Google his name. I just Googled officer, and I can't remember his name now, but like 10 different news sources had that story. And I wanted to say to my friend, all you had to do was Google.
That's what I was going to say. Like, it takes like, it's like when you see somebody tweet something and they just retweet it without clicking on the link. And it's like, all you got to do is click on the link and read before you retweet it. Now you got to do is just Google it.
Yeah, but there's like percentages. I think it's a pretty high percentage of people who retweet links on Twitter without checking.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And now Twitter is instituting this thing where it says you're retweeting something with a link. Are you sure you want to do that before it appears you haven't clicked on it? So that's something that's apparently coming down the pipe through Twitter. So, but I interrupted you. I don't want to do that. But you Googled it.
Then I guess it was May 19th or 20th. There was a shooting in Glendale, Arizona, and so the term Glendale was trending on Twitter. So I got on to see what was happening. And there was a picture of a tweet that someone had put out. Second shooter has been identified. And my little spidey sense started acting up, because if a second shooter had been, and remember, there's almost never a second shooter, right? If a second shooter had been identified, why is this one account from Nigeria with 40 followers the only one talking about it, right? So then you do a Google reverse image search, which is super easy. I use Chrome. You just hover the cursor over the image, right click. You're going to get a drop down menu. Search Google for this image. And this poor guy has been named as a second shooter. Anytime there's a shooting in the United States, this guy's picture comes back.
Wow.
And so I did a quick video, like, okay, I'm going to debunk this and put it on my page. And it was under 2 minutes. And before I went to bed that night, it had 1,000 views because it had the hashtag. It had the Glendale hashtag on it. And that story was still trending. So I ended up getting lots of media requests from that. But I also heard from the guy in the photo.
Really?
And yes. And he said, thank you so much for debunking this tweet. And I replied, I'm like, it's what I do. So then I ended up looking at this guy. Yeah. He's awful, but he doesn't deserve to be named as the second shooter every time there's a shooting.
He didn't kill anyone. He doesn't shoot anyone. So,
I mean, yeah, he isn't someone that I would want to have a beer with, but he certainly doesn't deserve to be maligned every time there's a shooter. So, and yet, right, because he was wearing a Make America Great Again hat and holding a rifle. So if I am in a social media bubble where everyone thinks, feels, believes, and votes the way that I do, and I see someone wearing that hat and holding a rifle, I automatically think, man, bad. Right. If I am of that political realm, then I'm more likely to retweet that because it reaffirms what I think about the other side, right? Quote unquote.
There's an affinity there.
Right. And so then I'm less likely to check for authenticity. And so that's how that stuff happens. I mean, it's very easy to understand why this happens, especially because now, our trust in the regular media is at an all-time low. Yeah. In fact, this morning, I tweeted this out. We're just talking about Twitter constantly.
It's all good.
I saw Rasmussen did a poll this morning that only 30% of Americans trust the political news that they consume. 30%.
Yeah. Wow.
So I was thinking about this morning. Do I trust the political news that I get? And I had to quote Ronald Reagan in my head: trust but verify. Trust but verify. Yeah. Like, and know your sources. Yeah. Know that if you pick up Washington Times, it's a conservative newspaper. Know that if you pick up the Washington Post, it's a liberal newspaper. Like, understand where your news is coming from. And I think that's something that we tend to think that our source is the only right source, and that's not always true. It's usually a gray area in the middle.
So what do you suggest people do? So I'm a person that I ingest news from several different sources. Like I don't want to say I don't trust anyone, but I take in news from lots of different places, especially on Twitter. And I don't just take it as the end all be all. Like I'll take it from here and I'll take it from there, and then I'll try and find another independent source and form my own conclusion, because inevitably you're going to find out that someone may insert a fact and someone may not insert that same fact, but another fact that they didn't insert in, and then you put two and two together.
But see, that takes time.
And that's the issue. That's what I was going to say. That's the issue, because that's more work. It's
more work for you. And really, we like everything just served on a platter.
Right.
Right?
And it doesn't help in this Twitter world of 280 characters where you get things just in blips and we need it now and immediate gratification.
It's like trying to get a drink out of a fire hose. Right? Yeah. So what you're engaged in is what we call lateral reading. So you see something, and then you think, I'm going to check to see if other sources are talking about this and what they say. So you're not doing a deep dive necessarily. You're doing a shallow
that's very accurate.
Across other platforms or other sources, and then you get a better vibe, I think. But again, lateral reading takes time.
Yeah.
And that's the rub. This is because it's our responsibility. I don't trust Mark Zuckerberg to do it. I don't trust the government to do it. I don't trust Jack Dorsey of Twitter to do it for me. I have to do it. And that's, I think we're all looking for this easy option. You know, I've had so many people say, well, isn't there an app that'll tell me what's real and what's not? I'm like, yeah, it's in between your ears.
Yeah.
That's the app.
Yeah.
The hard part, too, is that sometimes we end up finding out that a message that we really agreed with is false, or something that we really hated was true. And so sometimes I think the work is not just daunting because of the time involved, but maybe we don't want to know the truth.
That was going to be my next thought, is how many people you see it and you heard it and then it got debunked and you're like, no, that's not true. That seems to be like 90% of what it is. Like, I don't believe it. And then someone tells you.
There's actually a term for that. First Draft News is a fantastic website if anyone's familiar with it. First Draft News, and then also News Literacy Project. It's called the familiarity backfire effect, and the idea is that if I hear something that contradicts what I feel or think or believe, I'm going to double down. It's almost like okay, I've been talking for a while about making a Star Wars reference, but now I'm going to make a Star Wars reference. It's almost like when you put the shields up. You know, shields up, nothing can get through. And maybe the first step really is to get us to bring our shields down and acknowledge the biases and baggage that we bring to the communication experience.
Yeah.
You know, how am I going to interpret a message differently than someone who's completely different than me?
And so this makes me think of something, because I've always been a kind of person, not only because of what I do professionally, that when you make a mistake, you own up to it and admit it. And when you're wrong about something, it's like, oh, okay, well, I can fix it. I can stand up and fix it. And from a graphic design, I'm using a different analogy. I'm going from a graphic design standpoint, because there are such things known as design mistakes, and they may or may not appear to you at first glance, but then when that huge billboard gets put up and everyone driving along Highway 70 sees it, you're like, oh man, I should have added a little outline on that, and that would have been just perfect, because you can barely see it from such a difference. Design mistake. And you come to these realizations over time that you figure out what you should be doing in the process versus before it's complete. So that's my design analogy for it. So when in taking in news, for me, it's Twitter. I follow a lot of different sources and I take it in. I don't want to make a mistake of retweeting, resharing, or saying, "Oh, I saw this on Twitter. Did you hear about that?" And I've done it myself, where I've saw a tweet, immediately shared it in a text with a friend, and it's like, "Oh, I just read the replies. Never mind that. That's not right." The people's ability to do that nowadays, it seems like I don't say it's minimal, but man, it's almost becoming non-existent because we don't want to admit being wrong. Like we have this shield of, and I'm going deeper than just Twitter here, talking about people. It's more of a psychology thing, but
completely.
The ability to just admit, oh, that's not right, and move on from it. That's a whole nother level to the challenge of all this.
The shields are up.
Yeah.
The shields are up, and I think that might be one of the first challenges, really, is to get people to acknowledge their shields. But at the same time, you can't get away from those standard questions. And maybe having people ask those standard questions helps bring their shield down.
Yeah.
I once had a teacher tell me that he had his students analyze far right websites and far left websites and then go to the website called Whois to find out who owns them. Mm-hmm. And that many of the far left and far right websites are owned by the same company.
Yeah.
And that was a real eye opener for the students. Like, oh, this is all about money. Mm-hmm. This is all about web traffic. And I think that it's really interesting when you take it to that level. Like, none of these platforms are in public service.
Right.
At all. And it's so easy for us to create things that look legitimate now.
You're talking to the guy that knows his way in and outside of Photoshop. So
yes. Well, there was something posted. Someone sent me a text about a riot that was going to happen in my neighborhood a couple weeks ago. From my brother's friend at the police department. There's always that
the chain.
Like my roommate's sister or something. And I just went online and went to fake text generator or something like that and made it look like Sting had tweeted that I was the coolest person in the world. And it took me 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And I responded like, don't believe everything just because it looks legitimate. We can go on breakeronnews.com. I mean, there's all these sites where we can create anything that looks as legitimate as something from CNN. And so while this is happening, while our trust in the mainstream media is at an all-time low, and then we're in these filter bubbles, right, where we only see messages from people who think, feel, believe, and vote the way that we do. No wonder this is all a problem.
Yeah.
No wonder. So it's up to us. I mean, we have to develop these skills of filtering information, acknowledging what a legitimate source is, and also understanding that, a traditional legacy media outlet typically hires people that have journalism training.
Yes.
That have journalistic skills. Joe down the street doesn't have that, but he has the ability to create something that looks like he does.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind constantly, is that always check the sources and understand the difference between a TikTok video about vaccinations and something from an authentic source with journalistic skills.
So the world moves at such a fast pace these days, and the way we take in information. My wife's a teacher, a high school teacher. I'm a marketing nerd, social media. We're both pretty entwined, and my wife's she's a tech person too. Like, she's all about Google Classroom and all that stuff. And when we had to do the virtual learning in our school district, it was an easy thing for her, and she loves trying to find new things to figure out to, reach students on the technical level. So in this household, we're pretty intertwined with the digital world and all things like that. But for the average parent that is, their kid wants a tablet, their kid wants video games, their kid's on a laptop, and the parent may not be. What advice would you give the parents to sort of ease their kid into safely being online or safely, navigating websites, and at the same time giving them the opportunity to learn? Because you want to give them the opportunity to figure these things out,
right? But
you don't want them to figure out things in the wrong way, if that makes sense.
Well, my first question would be, how do you define safely?
I don't know. In these days, I have no clue, because now everything is on there and they see what they want to see.
I'll tell you what I've said to parents, because I do a lot of parent talks in church basements and school cafeterias and stuff. And usually a parent will come up afterwards and say, my daughter's 12 and she really wants to be on Instagram, but I'm not ready. And my first question is, are you on Instagram?
Yeah.
And if they say no, I say, okay, you get on it and make sure that you understand how it works. Then my advice was, like, do you and your daughter have something that you enjoy doing together? Like, do you garden together or do cake decorating or something, right? Create a joint account for the two of you that celebrates what you create together and your hobby together. And then follow other people who have that same hobby and use the hashtag so that you're kind of holding your daughter's hand as you walk into this. And then after a couple of years where you two have been working on it together, then she's ready for her own account because you have modeled it for her. Now, the problem is like when a parent says, what's Snapchat? Why is my son on Snapchat all the time? And my response is, why aren't you on Snapchat? Yeah. If your son is spending so much time on Snapchat, you get on it. I'm like, once you start snapping your kid, once you start hearing from mom on Snapchat, it is no longer cool. Right? And it's the same with TikTok. My daughter TikToks during dinner. What can I do? I'm like, who's in charge at your house? Oh my gosh. But I can say that because I'm not a school district employee yet. But I would encourage parents to get as involved as possible in these apps and learn how they work.
Yeah.
Print up the terms of service, go through the terms of service with the kid so that they understand what they're agreeing to, where the money goes, how their data is going to be mined. It's a teachable moment, and yet it's so tempting when you've got a 7-year-old that won't leave you alone and is pestering you like crazy, like your kid, Yeah. And I tell the story in class. Because I was very idealistic when I had our first son. I'm like, oh, he's never going to watch TV, And then I decided that showering was good. And then I put him in front of the TV, right? But then I would talk to him and say, whatever's on television is not real. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. And then we'd watch a Cardinal game. Well, hang on. The Cardinal game is real.
Yeah.
So there's all of these scenarios that come up that are challenging for parents. And I'm just so glad I'm not a teenager in this world because this would really stress me out. But parents have something that I encourage, at least with television watching, it's called co-viewing, where you watch with the kid and you're asking questions constantly. And it's work, God, it's work. It's not easy. It's not easy. But I think it helps the child/student recognize that consuming media shouldn't just be passive. It should be an interaction. It should be an exchange. It should be active. I always have eyebrows raised at me when I say I'd rather have my sons playing Xbox than watching television. Because when they're playing Xbox, they are involved, they are engaged, they are solving puzzles, they are planning, they're communicating, they're collaborating. And in many cases, they're in a world that they created. They're in charge of the narrative. Right. And yet when they're watching TV, they are just along for the ride of a story that's been written by someone else.
Right.
And so I like the whole idea of active consumption rather than just passive consumption.
Interesting. I never thought about it in that way. That's interesting. I love the analogy of kids playing video game versus kid taking in the movie or the TV. That's something I never even thought about. And that's, as the marketing person in me, it's like I always think, but we do this to tug at the heartstrings. We do this to evoke emotion. You do this to create this. That's marketing. Like, that's how you get them to buy. That's how you get this to happen. And again, I'm saying this to someone that's a marketing person, is a social media nerd. I think about that stuff all the time because that's how it works. Like, that's what they teach you in college of, hey, this is how you sell. You've got to make it look nice and clean. Like, the hamburger's not really cooked. We paint it and then we put dry ice behind it to make fake heat and smoke. And that's the magic of TV. Like, I don't know how many people actually realize what you see isn't what you really see.
That ice cream is actually mashed potatoes.
Yes.
Because ice cream would melt under the lights. Yeah.
It's so many layers to it,
and that's what's so fun. That is what is so fun about media literacy, because there's always something new to talk about, always something new to uncover and peel away the layers, and there's always new platforms coming up new trends. In fact, my students they saved me this past semester because we ended up going full online March 15th. And I went through like a grieving period because the classroom full of students is my favorite place in the whole world. And I had to say goodbye to them. And they suggested that we created a Discord page for our classes. And if you're not familiar with Discord, it's a platform it was originally built for gamers, but that's where 90% of our interactions happened through the rest of the semester. And it wasn't just about school. It was pictures of our dogs. It was memes. We had a meme channel. We had a channel just for ranting, but it was, they take me places. And because of their creativity and willingness to try something new when we went full online, I will have a Discord page for every class I teach from here on out.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what do you do about bots? What is your tip on it? I don't want to say identifying, because to me, I don't want to say it's common sense to identify, because if a Twitter account was started...
That's so old school.
Well, let me rephrase it, because if a Twitter account was started in June of 2020 and has
red flag.
Yes, there. Has
right there
4 followers.
So you want to look at when the account was developed. You want to look at who they follow. I once got followed by a bot that followed only people named Julie. It was creepy. Another big clue is that you want to look at what they've tweeted. If they haven't tweeted anything, red flag. If they tweet anything with bad grammar, red flag. If they have a first name with 7 or 8 numbers after the first name, red flag. Really, you just have to be skeptical constantly. And I find a lot of weird direct messages on Instagram. I'm going to read one that I got yesterday.
Oh, boy.
Hello, beautiful. First clue. Hope we are keeping safe with all these protestations and virus everywhere.
Oh, boy.
I live in Kansas.
Oh, boy.
Like, you don't live in Kansas.
Not with that broken English, right?
Well, right. Like, that's one of the clues. You want to look at capitalization errors, verb agreement errors. You want a lot of our friends in the former Soviet Union have trouble with our articles, like our A's and B's. So you want to look at those. And the thing is, like, I could say till the cows come home, don't talk to a bot, don't talk to a bot. But if I'm a 16-year-old girl and I'm lonely and I'm not feeling very good about myself, and somebody reaches out to me and wants to talk to me, I'm going to talk to them.
Yeah.
Even if a professor says, that's a bot, I'm still going to reach out because of that affirmation, that attention. And so I feel like that's one of the first conversations to have about bots is like, what is it that's appealing about this interaction? And what hole is this filling? Right. But it's super easy to spot them.
But for some people, it really isn't, though. Like, there'll be people that will immediately retweet or share, and did you see this? And it's like, it really is puzzling. Like,
what you want to do, especially on Twitter, and I'm mainly referring to direct messages that I get, but especially on Twitter, if a tweet has gone viral and it's a relatively new account and it doesn't have many followers, that's the clue that all the bots are retweeting that particular bot. Right. So they work together to generate more traffic for each other. So you just want to pay attention to everything, and always, not in emails necessarily, but you want to click on the link definitely on Twitter before you send anything out.
Why do you think it's so hard for Twitter to stop bots and automation like that? Like, there's got to be something they could do, right?
Sheer volume.
Yeah.
How do they? And it's global, right? So it's not like we can legislate anything about it.
Right.
I was thinking about this morning, actually. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about regulation of these platforms. And I think it's a slippery slope. If Twitter starts saying, well, we're going to censor this and we're going to censor that, who's deciding?
Yeah.
Something that I've always said about Twitter is that the worst thing about Twitter is that anything goes.
Right.
The best thing about Twitter, anything goes.
And that's, Yeah, that's probably why I like it too, because I create my feed for me. Like, I don't think people really understand. You follow who you have an interest in. You interact with who you have an interest in. There's no rule that says if someone follows you, you have to follow them back. And I think people sort of get caught up in that. I know people will want to follow people back that follow you, but if you want to engage with someone, let them know you're human. Let them know you have an interest in the same topics or the same things, and they will be more, apt to reach back out to you and talk to you like a human and not a bot.
Right. And I think that's, I was thinking this morning, if I had my own social media platform, I would be hands off. Because the sheer volume makes screening almost impossible. And again, who decides what's offensive? Yeah. I mean, I know, and my libertarian is showing, right? But I feel like it's a slippery slope if these platforms start saying this is okay, but this isn't. Even though hypocritically, one of the reasons that I left Facebook is that they allow anti-Semite pages. So I realize that it's hypocritical of me to say that. But I'm just so glad that I don't own one of these platforms because they were not created to be news sources, but that is essentially what they have become.
Yes. And which is puts them in a weird spot. Yeah, you start talking about freedom of press and everything, and news outlets and journalists having Twitter accounts, and then may or may not being censored. It's like,
Well, and how does the First Amendment play to accounts that are created overseas? Right. And remember, the First Amendment doesn't apply on a platform owned by someone else. The First Amendment only exists to keep us out of prison for criticizing the government.
Right.
So we do not have First Amendment privileges on a platform that's owned by someone else. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have repercussions for what we say, but we do not have quote unquote freedom of speech. In fact, my dear Twitter friend, Julie Rouse, says that she starts her class by saying the first 5 words of the First Amendment are government shall make no law. It doesn't say Twitter shall make no law or Facebook shall make no law. It says government. So I think that's something to kind of keep in consideration. Our First Amendment privileges don't mean that there aren't repercussions for what we say. It just means we won't go to jail.
Do you think we'll still have a Twitter and a Facebook, just one of those two, this time 5 years from now?
5 years? Yeah.
10 years?
I don't know.
I hear people all the time saying they're leaving Facebook, and I feel like I do know of many people that have left Facebook, actually. Twitter, I see people go back and forth. I've seen actually people unfollow me, and I look them up, their account's not even there anymore, and then they're back, 3 months later. And I don't know the reasons. I never dig into them. And I'm like, I don't know if something happened, privacy, they just didn't want to be involved, and then they kind of missed it. I don't know what the difference are. But
something that's really helped me with Twitter, because it's, when you follow a lot of people, your timeline, this stuff's going to get lost.
Yes.
Right. And so I started using lists pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. So I have a list of news outlets that I trust. There are conservative outlets on there. There are liberal outlets on there. But it helps with my lateral reading. So if something is breaking, I go to that. I don't get on my regular timeline because that's where the crazy happens, right?
Yeah.
I go to my list of the blue checkmark verified news sources, and I see what they're saying about an event. And it helps. But again, that takes time.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say, again, clarifying myself as a Twitter nerd, but I use lists all the time. Like, I keep a list of everything that's happening in our school district, just so I don't have it mixed in with the crazy, just like as you said.
Yeah.
I keep a sports list of stuff that I'm interested in. I keep a college sports list of stuff that I'm interested in. I keep a list of just Missouri State sports, the college I went to.
Can we do a sidebar about Major League Baseball right now?
Absolutely. What's the hot take?
I'm just so sad. They have a great opportunity to be the only sport on TV, and they're losing it. They're not taking advantage of it. And I just miss baseball.
I do too. and I didn't realize I missed it until I watched a replay of the David Freese game.
Oh, Game 6 against the Rangers?
Yes. And I'm like, man, this is pretty awesome. Like, I didn't even realize at the beginning of that game that Joe Buck, they actually mentioned the line that his dad said, Jack Buck, years ago, we'll see you tomorrow night. They said it in like the second or third inning of that game. Like, I remember your dad saying that. And then here they are in the extra innings, and he actually said it. It's like, I'm like, I don't remember. I totally remember watching the game, but I don't remember them having that conversation in the third inning. Just blew me away, but it made me realize how much. Again, we're in St. Louis here for people that are listening out of town, and I know I've got several friends that listen that are in Chicago. Sorry, Cub fans, but it really is something different here in St. Louis. And yes, I miss it too.
Count the rings, Cub fans.
Not
Count
just
the rings.
rubbing it in.
I didn't realize how much I missed baseball until I watched AJ Schnock's 30 for 30 on Sunday night about Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa.
What do you think about that?
I thought it was outstanding. I thought it was beautifully shot. I was just so impressed. Now, in full disclosure, AJ is a friend of mine from high school.
Awesome.
I was so impressed with all of the people that he got to talk to.
Yes. Yeah.
George Will, Bob Costas, although Twitter was freaked out about his hands did look very strange. But the part that got me was when Skip Carey talked about looking over and seeing Jack Buck crying. And when he said, excuse me while I stand up and applaud. Like, it was really something. And that summer was so magical. And now I'm looking, it doesn't feel like summer because there's no baseball.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm ranting.
No, you're good. I like the documentary.
We'll do a separate podcast on baseball.
Totally fine. Now, I got to give you mine because as I just see Ken Rosenthal retweeting a tweet from 9 minutes ago that at the Philadelphia Phillies baseball camp, several positive coronavirus tests. So if baseball does have a deal, yikes. So we'll see what happens. Back to the 30 for 30, though. I loved it. It was great. I didn't like they intertwined some of the new shots with the old shots and mixed in some of the fan shots of current day with back then. It's all good, but I love the storytelling. There are people I knew that didn't like the fact that they didn't get deeper into steroids and all that stuff. But I'm like, remember what we were in that time. We're celebrating what those two guys were doing. And in the moment, it was just fun because guys were hitting home runs left and right. And here in St. Louis, the Cardinals weren't that great. And that was what we were clinging to in that season. So
right. We didn't make it in the playoffs and the Cubs did.
Right. Yeah. So,
and that's true because we didn't get the buzzkill of the steroids until after, and so I think the 30 and 30 matched that experience chronologically.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time. This has been awesome. If you do me a favor, tell the folks that they can follow you on Twitter and your website and how they can see some of the stuff that you do to teach folks about media literacy.
Yeah, if you are interested and you're on Twitter, you can find me at Jewel Nil Smith, JULNILSMITH, and my website is actually heyjuliesmith.com.
Perfect.
HEY Julie Smith. So there's a link there to my YouTube channel with a playlist of all my debunking videos and lots of resources that I use to verify online information.
I highly suggest the YouTube channel. When I see you post a video that pops up on Twitter, I go through and sometimes I'll see one that I missed. I'm like, God, it's like, why don't people just do this? This is so easy. It's not that hard.
Well, it's so fun. It's like being a detective.
Yes. And it's visual because people can see what you're doing. Like you literally just click through, your screen sharing what you're doing. It's perfect. So I'm gonna share one of those when I do the promo for the tweet here, promoting the podcast. But yeah, I really appreciate you taking time. This has been fun. We'll have to do this again because we can probably talk about not just media literacy in general, but all the different things going on with social media stuff, especially in an election year.
Okay, so let's make a date to talk about election information on social media.
Okay.
Later on in the summer when things start really heating up.
I like it.
Okay.
We'll do it.
Derek, thank you so much for having me.